David C. M. Carter. Thank you so much for being on the Jason Wright Show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I got to tell you, this is exactly what this podcast was developed for, is content and conversations like the one we're about to have. And it's a purely selfish endeavor. If I wanted to sit down and talk to you, I couldn't just probably ring you up in the United Kingdom and say, "Hey, David, do you mind imparting some of your wisdom to me?" But a podcast allows me to speak to brilliant people all the time, and so you are proof positive that my little mission here is working. What I would like to do, and I'm going to have your bio. We'll do an intro with it and everything. I don't want you to have to sit through your bio. I don't want you to have to recount your entire almost 50 years of executive mentoring and experience. I want to get right into some of the topics that you cover. I do want you to, share some of your history and how you got to the point where you are, for sure, please. But I also want to leave the the greatest amount of time for actually doing some real time mentoring and coaching for this audience so that they can understand better as leaders or as current followers that would be leaders, some tools and tactics they can deploy in their careers. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Well, the first thing I want to talk about is how you develop this idea of tackling character. I know that's a key component to your mentoring. So I've had a number of people on recently in particular talking about culture. Culture is very important right now. I mean, it always has been, but leaders are now keen to the idea of command and control is a bit outdated. We need to have a purposeful culture. And so that's been talked about quite a bit. But I like your approach where you coach for character. Tell me what that means to you.
Can I start off by unpacking the word Entelechy, which is the name of our company, because
Absolutely.
it goes back 2,500 years to the Greek philosopher Aristotle. And he coined the phrase Entelechy. So the entelechy of an acorn is an oak tree. The entelechy of a caterpillar is a butterfly. And so the entelechy of Jason is the ultimate version of Jason with all of his potential fully actualized, like the acorn and the oak tree, like the caterpillar and the butterfly. And so I loved discovering the word many years ago that the ultimate version of me or any business I was working on would be its entelechy. Aristotle also coined another phrase, which is that character determines destiny. And what he meant by that was that we all end up in life, wherever we end up, as a direct function of our character. And if you think of the top 5 golf professionals in the world, or the top 5 basketball players, or the top 5 athletes, any athlete, they've all got basically the same skill sets and training regime. So what's the thing that separates the best from the rest? And I always believed it was character. And so throughout my long career, there's been a red thread of helping people become their entelechy. Now, I didn't even know the word until quite a few years, but that's always been my life mission, to help people be more successful and help them be the best version of themselves. And what actually happened was understanding this concept of character. When I was talking with someone, whether it was a mentoring client or whatever, and I asked them lots and lots of questions about the problem they were trying to solve, and I always had 2 favorite questions. Oh, tell me more. And then they dig a bit deeper. Oh, why is that? Tell me more. Why is that? And then you'd eventually get down to what the real problem was. And then as you helped them unpack the solution, very often I'd say to them things like, which, by the way, sort of came instinctively, well, maybe it sounds like you need to be more courageous or more vulnerable or more visionary or more purposeful or more disciplined or reliable. It could be. And they were like, oh, yes, I definitely think that would help. And, well, how could you do that? And how would it help? And it was always going off and working on one or two character qualities that solved the problem. And so if you mentor the chief executive of the world's biggest platinum mining company, which I did, with 98,000 employees and 54% of the world's platinum supplies, the last thing he needed mentoring on was mining platinum. He was surrounded by gurus and experts, but he wanted to develop a leadership team and a leadership culture within the organization. And over the years, all of the mentors in Merrick & Co., which was the international CEO mentoring company I started and set up, which eventually became the world's leading CEO mentoring company. All of the mentors used to say to me, "What's that story you tell about becoming more reliable or more visionary or more this or whatever?" And what I realized that over the years, I'd collected all these stories about different character qualities. And when I wrote my book, Breakthrough, 10 years ago, I thought, I've never written down all these character qualities that I've got stories and talk about. And it probably took me about a year to talk to all of my old colleagues and clients and have them remind me of the character qualities and the stories. And so, that was how it all came about. And the more I sat and pored over thinking about my book and what I was trying to share, which, by the way, initially was a very modest project. I wrote a book for my two children, who I'd brought up on my own for 20 years. And I just decided I want to put it all down in writing and give them a book. And it's actually quite a funny story, but a friend of mine who had written 19 books that had sold more than 1 million copies each, I asked him to read the book and tell me what he thought of it. And he sent it off to a publisher, and that's how it got published.
It's a good friend to have, especially in publishing, because it's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, what came about was this framework that I had developed over many years, unconsciously and innately. It turned into these 54 character qualities that underpin the development of every skill on the planet. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I started challenging people, saying, "Well, can you find a 55th one or a 56th one that's missing?" And no one so far has come up with one. And then 3 and a bit years ago, you couldn't open McKinsey Quarterly or PwC's report or the Times or the Sunday Times, The Economist, and everyone was writing about the soft skills crisis. And so we did a massive piece of research over a year and a quarter and asked hundreds of heads of HR and L&D what the soft skills were that their employees or applicants lacked that they needed them to have. And that resulted in a framework with 77 essential soft skills that employers were looking for in their applicants and their workforce that they didn't have. And I had an epiphany one day, which was, those 54 character qualities underpin those soft skills. And so if I can give you a very quick example, one of the world's top 10 global management consultancy firms accepted that they were a lot less profitable per employee than their competitors. And they basically decided it was, in order to improve their productivity, the thing they needed to focus on was better time management, because they build in 6-minute increments of time. And so everyone in the entire firm over a 3-year period was sent off on a $2,880 per person 3-day time management course. And at the end of the course, 95% of the people who went on the course scored 95% in the quiz. So, well, they were very clever. But then they had to accept that a week, a month, a quarter, half a year later, there was no improvement in time management. And so they called me in and said, how come 95% scored 95% in the quiz, and how come we haven't seen any improvement? So I asked them to show me the course and show me the quiz. And I said, well, the quiz one's easy. You made the classic mistake of assessing what was taught, not what's been learned and applied. And also the course is all about the benefits of time management and the theory of time management, not how to actually become good at it. So I said, look at these 6 character qualities: accountable, responsible, disciplined, organized, efficient, and reliable. If you taught your people how to be those 6 character qualities, guess what? They'd be good at time management and would improve their productivity. So you've taught the wrong thing, you've assessed the wrong thing, and there's this domain that sits underneath all of these soft skills, which is character. And you just need to match the right character qualities to those skills. And bingo, people go, oh, I need to be more reliable. Oh, I need to be more disciplined and more organized or more efficient. Right. How do I do that? And then, of course, they end up being better at time management and more productive. And so every time, I mean, there's so much jargon in the world, and particularly in those big consultancy companies, and where people talk about, oh, we need our people to be agile learners and blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, what does that mean? My favorite story, and I'm not going to name the firm, but in the middle of COVID, the CEO, and this is a 40,000 global consulting firm, sent an email to every single employee and said, because of COVID and the pandemic and the disruption to our business and the world, everyone in this firm needs to be brilliant from now on at managing VUCA. Do you know what VUCA is?
I don't know what VUCA is. What is it?
Well, by the way, neither did 30,000 employees.
Okay, good.
It stands for velocity, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity.
Okay.
So, everyone was told, you've got to go out and become good at managing VUCA. And they're all going, well, what does that mean? And how do I do that? So we then said, well, here's the half a dozen character qualities that if you're going to have to manage VUCA, you need to be good at. So focus on developing those character qualities, and then you'll be good at managing VUCA. But you can't teach someone to manage VUCA, but you can teach them to be the underpinning character qualities. And so, you do lots of presenting, so do I. We could have the world's best PowerPoint deck that's ever been put together with the snazziest slides and smoke and mirrors and laser beams and everything else. But if you're standing on the stage trembling because you've got no confidence, or you're not calm or expressive, then guess what? Your brilliant presentation will fall flat on its face. So what are the character qualities you need to be good at being a presenter? Is never, if you can Google making a great presentation, you'll get 13 pages of how to do a great keynote or PowerPoint presentation, but no one's going to teach you how to present in a confident, courageous, empathetic, vulnerable, humorous way to get your brilliant presentation across. Because we all know after we've walked out of a presentation, it wasn't the content that we remember, it's how we felt. Mm-hmm. And if you warm to the person. And so bizarrely, even though I've done, lots and lots of television and radio and lots of talks and book tours and all the rest of it, I never speak with a slide. If I ever present to someone, I have one slide only on my screen, and it's the 54 character qualities.
I have learned myself that is one of the things that I've seen in a lot of organizations. If you train people to perform as opposed to actually inherently and innately get the skill and it come through in their work, then you're missing the point. And I think that's what happened for so long, is that, and it's kind of the fixed versus growth mindset attitude. The fixed mindset is all about appearances. As long as my PowerPoint looks incredible, then hopefully I will be seen as bright, as opposed to actually understanding enough the content to such a degree that I can fail. I put in the reps to learn the content so that all I need is my one slide with my 54 points that I'm most passionate about, and then I will deliver it in such a way that it's believable and it actually penetrates. Going back to the character thing that I thought was an incredible real life account of this that I just saw recently. My wife lured me into watching the David Beckham biography or documentary on Netflix. Now, why my wife wanted to watch a documentary about a football player, I just can't imagine. And obviously, I'm being facetious considering the subject was David Beckham. But one of the things that struck me about Beckham, I knew nothing about him because I'm the typical American. We have our football, and then around the most popular sport in the world doesn't really register with us, especially here in East Texas. But so I knew very little about David Beckham or the game. But when I watched that, one of my the thing that impressed me most about him was whenever he was playing, when he was talking to coming over to LA and he was still playing in Europe, I believe it was for Milan. The coach said, "You'll never play." No, excuse me, it was for still with, Real Madrid. And the coach said, "You're never gonna play another second for Real Madrid. You will not." But he was still under contract. And David Beckham, even though he was not allowed to play in the games, and they actually segregated him from the rest of his teammates and made him practice by himself. And David Beckham, one of the greatest footballers of all time, showed up every practice, worked his tail off, never missed until finally his teammates brought him in, went to the coach and said, "Please let him come practice with us. This is not right." He did, and he helped them win more games. But that told me that was as much, yes, David Beckham had a lot of raw talent, but to your point earlier, if he had all the raw talent and none of the character, he never would have been the David Beckham that we're watching a documentary about. By the same token, I had an up close view of the of Jeff Skilling and the Enron team. I was working. We had a small startup that I had with two partners, and we worked. And Enron was our sole client. And watching these traders and the employees work under the direction of Jeff Skilling, where it was win at all costs. That was the character of that company. It's win at all costs, even if it means showing little to no character. So those are two contrasting in sport and in business that speak exactly to what you're talking about. Now, I would like to ask you a question. As you've gone into, I mean, like you talk about the mining company and these global firms that you're working with, and you're dealing with the CEO. How are you able to okay, let me back up. Have you ever gone into a situation, and this is something I've faced, I would love your advice on. I have learned that if a board brings me in to help, and I'm using coach and mentor synonymously. I know that
Mhm.
there's probably some differences, but if they bring me in to say coach a CEO or division leader, there's a lot more resistance at that point because they've said, "Hey, CEO, you need this guy." Whereas if a CEO reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I'm incredible at at executing acquisition and running the business, but I also have some blind spots, be it character, be it just leadership skills. I need you." That works better. How have you had to face that situation where the CEO that's obviously successful, they've got the tools, or they wouldn't be the CEO, and how do you gain their trust to where they're able to step back and go, "I'm gonna listen to what David has to say because he has the experience, and I'm gonna be vulnerable," because that can be very hard for CEO. How do you manage that interpersonal relationship with your clients?
Um, well, there's a very simple answer to that. You can read about the CEO in their annual report, his LinkedIn or her LinkedIn, press comments, whatever, whatever. But before I started working with any CEO as a client, I used to get them to do a very comprehensive and detailed 360. And surprise, surprise, how they saw themselves versus how everybody else saw them was often very different. And so immediately you're armed with information that it would take years to find out if you didn't have that information. And so you might start off the conversation by saying, well, tell me some of the challenges that you're facing in your business and some of the things that you'd like to achieve a breakthrough with in your business. And they might talk about, oh, we should be growing our top line a lot more than we are. We should have much better margins than we've got. Our supply chain's a bit screwed up and we should improve that. We're finding it very difficult to retain people. We've got such big churn in the company. We've got recruitment problems and whatever. And okay, and how would you describe the culture of your company today? Oh, we're get up and go company. We're creative. We're agile. And they say all the usual bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, tell me about you and your leadership style. Describe yourself. Oh, I'm this and I'm that and the other. Okay, well, that's fantastic. Wonderful. Let's now have a look through how the 22 people in your senior leadership team and other people have, how they've evaluated you. Well, that is the great undressing, because there and then these people were giving feedback with good intentions, and they know what the strategy is. They all know what the problems in the company are, and they're specifically asked to give feedback in terms of how could Jason, become a better leader to overcome the challenges we're facing to achieve the desired, outcome we're looking for. And so it's quite context specific. If 9 of your 10 assessors say that, well, Jason can be a bit of a bully, but you don't see yourself as a bully at all, you describe yourself as encouraging, guess what? There's an awful lot you can unpack in that conversation. And so I kind of have always started off by understanding what they think the challenges in their industry are, in their company are, for them as a leader, in their culture. And then I work with them to have a look at what their senior leadership team and others what they've said about it.
Have you ever
Um,
had have you ever had an executive, you go through the 360 and they say, "These people are full of shit. They don't know me at all. They don't know what they're talking about." And then you have to coach them through kind of that defensive nature?
um, in all honesty, I haven't. I haven't. And but that's not because I was particularly lucky to not have one. I think I was particularly smart to figure out that that might be how that person would be,
Mhm.
and I chose not to work with them. And so one of the reasons I think my old firm was very successful is because we chose our clients very, very carefully, but we chose our mentors even more carefully. And I'll give you an example of that. There was a very famous British retail company that had a pretty turbulent few years, and they ousted their CEO. And he was only in the job a couple of years, I think. And anyway, he ended up applying to us to become a mentor. He'd heard about us. And, it's a very famous British household name, and he was a household name too. And, it normally, a household name like him and his company would have been good on our website. And,
Sure.
oh, look, the former CEO of that company as one of their mentors. Anyway, after chatting to this chap for about 15 or 20 minutes, I said to him, Fred, you're just not a good fit for us. And he said, why is that? And I said, well, because I just asked you what have been some of the setbacks and the challenges that you've had in your career, and how have you overcome them? And you said, I've never had a setback I've needed to overcome. And it's like, well, in which case, how are you ever going to be able to mentor a
Right.
CEO dealing with constant setbacks that they need to overcome? And so if I had gone in to interview him to become a potential client, I'm sure I would have had the same story from him. And it's like, and if you'd had to, well, I'm not really here as a volunteer. I'm here because the chairman sent me. It's like, there's no point even starting with someone like that. But I'm exaggerating to make the point.
Sure.
I mean, sometimes you could say, well, why do you think the chairman has sent you? And, da, 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 and what's the chairman said to you? And well, is that something you think you like to work on and fix? And, maybe sometimes people say, well, actually, yes, I would. But if they were really arrogant and conceited. And going back to something you said about Enron earlier, I think that's there are plenty of organizations around the world where the leader and the culture is ruthless, absolutely ruthless. And you only survive by eating what you kill. And I can't think of a company that's had that leadership and that culture over multiple generations. And maybe there are a few, maybe in financial services and a few other places like that. But I think that what's happened in the world, particularly the last 10 years, with younger people entering the workforce, who have figured out, you know what, I'm probably never going to save up enough money for a deposit on buying my own house and getting on the property ladder. And I've got this student debt's going to take me 20 years to pay off. So my life's not going to be like my parents. And so actually, perhaps I don't want to pursue the golden escalator career and lifetime that my parents had. I want to do something more meaningful and more purposeful. I'll work for Greenpeace or a charity or in the green economy.
Or try to turn a Fortune 500 company into an activist organization or a Greenpeace, and
Yeah,
we see a lot of
that,
that happening now.
that's going on a lot. Change the company from the inside. And also in the UK, and I think these stats apply in America as well, every year for the last 10 years, the percentages of people exiting college or university that want to become an entrepreneur has just gone up and up and up and up, up and up every single year. And so the real talent that leaves college and university often doesn't want to go and work for a big company. They want to go and set their own thing up or go make a difference in the world somewhere.
Right.
So, but, let's face it, even organizations like the mafia, have a culture. And Hamas have a culture, uh, and we might not understand it or we might not relate to it. But interestingly enough, in order to survive in one of those cultures, there are probably character qualities that you need to dial up or have as strengths, but use them in a different way to how you use them in a nice situation.
I think that's a very fair point, and I want to ask you this question, not to cut you off, but you just jogged something. So obviously, diversity, inclusion, and all the rest is such a topic of discussion, but it kind of goes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost kind of what you were talking about earlier. It's okay. It's the person that has the beautiful PowerPoint, but knows none of the content, and without the PowerPoint, they're completely crippled. Versus the person who truly understands and knows the content. What you said there, I think makes a lot of sense. If we bring people in from all over the globe, which most large organizations are just going to have, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Singapore, whether it's in America, they're going to have a mix of cultures. And what I think the thing that devalues the whole diversity and inclusion movement is that you're trying to meet a metric, a report, and so that you can say you know it, instead of truly looking and going, okay, what is the difference in these cultures that we can accentuate to, one,
Okay.
make that individual more comfortable, right? Because they're getting to heighten what's best about what they bring to the table. It seems like there's a lot of that going on as opposed to truly trying to make something better. Am I missing that?
No. Let me tell you a quick story, and then I want to describe a little bit how Entelechy solves that problem.
Okay.
And so the quick story is many, many years ago. So for every super expensive fee paying client I had, I also had a pro bono client who I worked with for nothing. And they ran a charity or a not for profit or a social enterprise. And in one of those pro bono clients, there was a new CEO parachuted in, and 2 or 3 months later, everyone in the entire company was talking about a log jam, a bottleneck, where this person wanted to sign every check and open every letter and do everything. And whilst I was waiting to go in and have a meeting with this CEO, in the office outside, there was the accounts manager and this person and this person. Anyway, I was talking to the accounts manager, and she was lovely and delightful and clearly very competent at her job. And I said, "Oh, what do you do when you're not at work?" And she said, "Oh, well, actually, I'm a magistrate in the local court system. And, I get to send people to prison and fine them. And I'm responsible. And I'm also the head of our community centre. And I've got a multi-100,000 pound a year budget that I have to look after." Oh, great. Okay. Anyway, so I'm talking to the CEO half an hour later. And he's like, "Oh, well, there's no one in this organization I can trust. And with the money and everything." I said, "You do realize that Janet sitting outside does this, this, and this outside of work?" And he's like, "No, I didn't know that about her at all." So of course, a week later, he delegated everything to her and solved that bottleneck. Anyway, going over to your diversity and inclusion and everything. So when we go into a company, we want them to become, in a year's time, a company of character. That's the mission. And we want to create qualitative and quantitative measurements of an improvement in productivity and profitability that will generate a gigantic ROI on our intervention. So how does that start off? A bit like when I used to take on a mentoring client, we show the 54 character qualities to every employee, every single employee. And we say, rate yourself in terms of strengths. Okay, so, and need to work on this one. Then we get everyone to get 10 people in the company to do a 360 on them, so they can compare how they see themselves versus how other people see them. And then we ask them, how do you see the entire company today's strengths and growth opportunities? And what would you like the strengths to be in a year's time? And out of that, every individual gets a report which says, here's your 180, how you see yourself. Here's your 360 and how everybody else sees you, and a Delta report. Here's how everybody sees the company and how you see it in the Delta report. And here's how everyone would like to see the company and you in a Delta report. And it also gives them an AI-powered, personalized learning journey in terms of what character qualities they could work on to have the quickest wins and the biggest hits, out the doors. And the company gets this report called a kaleidoscope and an interactive dashboard where they can say, let's look at our marketing team of 40 people. Who are the peak performers? Who are the top 5 or 6 people in the marketing? What character qualities do they have? Oh, it looks like they've got all the same ones. So now we know which other character qualities we need the other people to dial up to become as good as the top performers. But what this also brings out is, oh, that's interesting, because Jenny in HR and Sophie in logistics, they've got all of the character qualities that you need to be brilliant in marketing. So maybe we ought to be swapping them round and getting them off that seat in the bus and getting them to another seat in the bus. And by the way, there's 2 people in marketing who've got all the right skills that would work in HR or finance. And the other beautiful thing about this that you can do is you can look through the kaleidoscope at age, length of service, been in the company less than a year, less than 5 years, more than 10 years, whatever, gender, ethnicity. And then you end up going, wow, the most creative people in our company are not in the creative team. They're over there and over there and over there. And they're a mixed bag of religions and races and genders and all the rest of it. And so you can have the most creative person in your company not in the creative department. You could have the person who, and so it really, what it does is take away all of that diversity and inclusion, um, confusion or barriers, because you see everybody, regardless of their race, their gender, or whatever, their color, through the prism of character, which applies to everybody.
Well, and I gotta think too, if you have an organization with employees where their skill set and their passions are matched with their vocation, they're probably not gonna complain. They're probably gonna be excited that they're contributing because I guess it was, Daniel Pink that said, what is it? Autonomy, purpose, and, there's one other I'm missing that is what truly brings about the best in employees. Everybody thinks it's just you just pay them more. If that's the carrot that everybody wants, and no, it's not. It's giving them autonomy, independence, and I think it was something, to the point of, like, being heard or feeling like they actually have an impact. So if you've got employees in the right seat on the bus, then I would think that they're much less likely to look over and go, "Well, why am I not doing that? That's probably better than what I'm doing." So that makes a lot of sense. I wanna ask you a
In,
question. Go ahead.
sorry, just very quickly, in my book Breakthrough, I devised a very simple little formula for being in the optimum flow to become your Entelechy,
Mm,
which is find a job that you're absolutely brilliant at,
mm,
that you love doing, that pays the bills and makes a difference.
mm,
And by the way, there's no reason why after 2 years or 3 years or 4 years and you've grown and learned more, there isn't another role that you could do brilliantly and love doing and pay the bills and make a difference. But it's people who are in work, who aren't brilliant at the job and they don't really like it, and they're therefore not making a difference, that they will move for money. But, that we've had plenty of company, with big companies, we've had plenty of people over the last couple of years join our little company, um, where we've advertised for a digital marketing assistant or, content partner or a copywriter, all sorts of different jobs. And they've actually taken a pay cut to come and join us because they believe in our mission and vision and values and purpose. And they want to be part of making a difference to help everybody in the world become their Entelechy.
mhm.
And I'm not talking about a 50% pay cut or anything, but if they were
Oh,
earning 40 grand a year and we were
yeah.
advertising the job at 36 grand a year, they'll think actually, and of course, in the modern world, if that means because we're a completely remote company, oh, actually, I can work from home and I don't need to move uh, to get this new job, then I can save 4 grand a year on travel costs and commuting or whatever. So in their head, they're like, I can still pay the bills, but this is a job I'll absolutely love and I'll be brilliant at it and it'll make a difference in the world.
One of the biggest problems that I have, David, and I've had this for years, man, is that you could put me in a nitroglycerin plant, and within a certain I wouldn't be the best nitroglycerin plant manager, but I could figure it out, and I would run it good enough to make a living at it. And so I've been able to figure out how to do a lot of things. And I do a lot of things that actually make me money. The things I'm passionate about, public service, podcasting, I'm terribly passionate about these things, but I haven't been able to coalesce all of them into what you're talking about of doing something purposeful and getting paid such that I can,
Pay the
maintain
bills.
pay the bills, no debt. My wife's not mad at me saying that I'm just, pursuing vain pursuits. That's what's been the most challenging thing for me. I told you I've started multiple companies, run them. I have learned this about myself, kind of like what Drucker said to Jim Collins. He said, "You can either run a world-class company or do like what David C.M. Carter does, help others run world-class companies, but you can't do both. You can't be the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos or whatever, and also go out and be an executive coach. You gotta pick your lane." So I figured out that I don't necessarily that's why I escaped from corporate America at the age of 28 and became an entrepreneur. I realized I was on a path to do that, to climb the ladder, but I was like, "I don't wanna run a major organization." I like developing people and coaching and mentoring and watching them excel, but I feel like, and I have not read your book Breakthrough yet. Actually, it's on my, order list since we were doing this conversation, and I think that's where I'm looking for the breakthroughs. I've got all of these just I'm a generalist. I am the epitome of a generalist. But honing it all into a focus of what I should be doing each and every day, it's been a real challenge for me. And I'll take any advice you might have.
I think it does go back, and sorry to repeat myself. So am I brilliant at it? Do I love doing it? Does it pay the bills and does it make a difference? And so I can tell you hundreds of stories. I remember many, many years ago, I lived in New York for a year, and in the previous year I lived in La Jolla, California, and started to learn to play the saxophone. And I had a brilliant teacher in California, and I ended up hiring a young lady who was absolutely brilliant at playing the saxophone. I mean, she was brilliant. And she loved doing it, but it didn't pay the bills. And it made a difference, but it didn't pay the bills. And eventually, she had to accept that however hard she practiced, um, however many auditions she went to, she was never going to be able to. And so she decided she was going to become a teacher. And she was brilliant at being a teacher. She loved doing it. It paid the bills, and it made a big difference to her students.
Right.
And she realized, 2 years after this epiphany, that she was making twice, 3 times as much as she ever would have made if she'd stuck to trying to be a performing artist. And I could tell you hundreds of stories over the years. And, another friend of mine uh, um, was, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a generalist at all, but, most of my friends would say that I'm a really good cook, and I'm really good at it. And actually, I enjoy it, but the enjoyment for me isn't so much the cooking; it's the sitting around the table and having the conversation over the meal. It's the company and the quality
Yeah.
of the conversation I love. So, I think I get a high rating of I'm a really good chef, and I like doing it for different reasons. I certainly don't think anyone would ever pay me to cook for them, and I'm not sure it makes a difference. So it may be and so I think that I've met and by the way, I've met so many CEOs in my long career. So when you go out for dinner with them or go out for lunch and you stop having the mentoring and get to know them a bit better, they're like, "Oh, how did you end up being the chief executive of this law firm or whatever?"
Mhm.
Oh, my father was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, and it was just assumed I'd always go into the law. And so my parents helped me get into a great university, and then helped me open the door through my uncle to get into this firm. Blah, blah, and here I am 30 years later as the CEO of this law firm. Um, and are you happy doing it? Well, I'm the senior partner, so what's not to like? I said, yeah, but if you had your time again and you could have done something completely differently and it still paid the bills and made a difference, oh, I would have been a jazz singer, or I would have been a pastry chef, or whatever. I don't know what they say.
Yeah.
Um, and often it's really sad that those people say, well, I'm earning $1 million a year and I've got a second home in Malibu or whatever it is. Are you happy? Well, I'm not unhappy,
Yeah.
but are you happy? Well, I'm not unhappy. That was all they could ever say. And so we used to do this thing at Merrick, which obviously I'm not involved with anymore, been for the last 10 years or so, but we used to have this business leaders forum gig, and we used to get them to do things as well as just sit and talk, and do things that they never would have done before. And afterwards they'd say, oh my God, I never in a million years thought I'd go paragliding or whatever. And we got to do that were really fun and bonding, and they all ended. And one of the things that I learned about really successful CEOs, they were nearly always very humble and modest about their achievements.
Mhm.
They realized it was as much by luck than by judgment that they ended up doing well. And whenever they got together, they never bragged about, oh, I doubled the share price and trebled the rent. They all talked about the war stories and the
Oh, yeah.
disasters they overcome.
Oh, sure. Yeah, those are always more fun. I think you really just helped me there with the story of the teacher, because one of the things that, like I mentioned earlier, I love this podcast. I would not have met you otherwise. I wouldn't have met so many of the fascinating people that I get to speak to on a weekly basis. And one of the things that, I have considered doing is teaching other people how to start their podcast, because if you're a guy like me that it took me forever. There's a lot of resistance to starting a podcast. It is not nearly as hard as a lot of people think. You think you have to have technical skills and all this sort of thing, but it's something that I can do very easily now. As I can scale it as big or as small as you want, and I don't want to be the next Joe Rogan. That does not appeal to me at all. And so, because of fame and that sort of thing, to me, this is building. I always call this building my birdhouse every day. It's this conversation recorded and what we'll do with it later. It did not exist yesterday, but it will exist in perpetuity after this. You and I have together built something, and that's the satisfaction for me. But I want to help other people do that, and I think I could probably monetize that to teach others to do that. So it's weird that you mentioned the saxophone teacher, because I love doing this, but, podcasts, are not I always tell people, if you're gonna start a podcast to make a lot of money, you're wasting your time. You better be leveraging it for knowledge, to build an audience for something else you're doing, or something to that effect. But the teaching, I would love to do. I would love to help other people, CEOs that want to have conversations and just create something. So I think you inadvertently gave me some great advice there. So I appreciate that.
I'll send you the invoice.
You got it. You got it. Deal. Okay. Now, one of the questions I want to ask you too before I let you go: who are some CEOs or leaders that you could just, whether you've coached them or not? Like, I know that the one that jumps to mind, I knew him personally before he was the CEO of Home Depot, uh, and then was mentioned in Jim Collins' Good to Great book, Frank Blake. Kinda like you said, very humble guy, very smart, very academic guy, loved by his team, just a good he's kind of my avatar, I guess, hedgehog CEO is what Jim Collins, I think he fell in that category. But who are some of the leaders that you look at and think to yourself, this is someone who has found their passion, matched their talent, and they have the character to lead an organization through good times and bad, and they're that leader that will 100x a company versus that one that they had everything they needed going in, but they just couldn't get there. Do you have some of those?
Um, I'm going to be very controversial,
Okay.
given that you're in Texas and your audience is probably nearly all in America.
Yes. You'd be surprised. We've got a big following in the UK, so you're in, believe it or not. So we're so you'd be surprised.
Okay. But I don't think anyone in your audience would disagree that the world's got a lot of problems at the moment.
Absolutely.
Whether it's this new war in Israel or in Ukraine, the world's in a pretty terrible state at the moment. And we need real leaders. And the puppet show of the duopoly of, in your world, the Democrats versus the Republicans has got to stop. It's so horrible to watch, where everyone around the world used to admire America, and now we laugh at you.
Yeah.
And you've scored more own goals in the last few years than any football team in history. And so the leader that I'm going to say I admired the most, who I'd love to have to dinner, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Really? Interesting.
And I have been a huge fan of his for many years. I was introduced to him many years ago um, because of his work with Children's Health Defense.
Mhm.
And the work he's done is painstakingly researched, and he really is out there to make the world a better place and safer for children. And I watched his interview podcast on Joe Rogan a month or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel I knew him well, but I knew of his work and I knew where he was coming from. And I've always liked his intellect and his articulation. And he went on to Joe Rogan, which is like a 3-hour interview. And Joe Rogan in the first 5-10 minutes was typical Joe Rogan. He's like, well, you don't have a very good reputation. I've heard bad things about you and you're not credible because of this, that, and the other anyway. And at the end of 3 hours, Joe Rogan was humbled, absolutely humbled to have participated in a rational, clear, calm, articulate conversation about all of the many challenges that he would hope to be able to resolve, not only for American citizens, but for the world. So that would be my nominee for you.
That's an interesting choice. I've actually reached out to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s team to try to get him on the show. A friend of mine just sat down with him in Austin, and so I'm hoping that by a bank shot connection, we can get him on. As you can imagine, he's getting requests by the thousands, and so I respect that. And there's something that you said there that I can completely understand where you're coming from. He has no reason to do it other than to do good, and then I think that's what we lack over here a lot. Y Trump is his own animal. All the others have been in the political game, and I'm not saying that they're right or wrong for that. That's their choice of vocation, and that's where they pursued to make their difference in the world. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. does come at it from a perspective, it seems, that he really has nothing to gain except more scrutiny, which Lord knows he's had plenty of that for a number of years, whether it's in regard to vaccination or whatever the case may be. So I do think he is that rare leader that's coming at it for no ulterior motive for sure. And you also bring up a good point in that, and what we're suffering from over here for sure is that we're leaders have always been in short supply. But it just these days, it's getting to the point where if you wanna run for president of the United States of America, if you are that good leader, you have to do the calculus and say, "Okay, my reputation is gonna be destroyed. I'm gonna be taken down. I'm gonna get thrown into this just ridiculous clown show that can be American politics." So I worry that so many of those folks that we would like to be in the arena will stay out. And I hate to hear you say that. I got some of the same sentiments whenever I was in Europe earlier this year, like I mentioned before we got on. I would ask people, so what does it look like from here looking across the pond? And they just said, what the hell's going on? What is
No,
happening?
so we help build companies of character and people of character, but wouldn't it be great if America restored itself as a country of character?
Yeah, it would be beautiful. One of my dear friends is an
Sorry,
executive. Sure,
sorry,
sure.
I just wanted to very sadly, she passed away a number of years ago, and I won't tell you the whole long story, but my mother's brother's wife, my auntie, came from New Zealand and was a Maori, and she was the most beautiful person on the inside and the outside I think I've ever met. And she, going back to do something you're passionate about and you're great at doing and pays the bills and makes a difference. She was a reception class teacher in a school in Auckland. And she, despite every year being offered pay rises, promotions, deputy headmistress position, blah, 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 she goes, no, no, no. God sent me to this planet to teach young people to love to learn. And I love my job and I'm going to stay here. So for her entire career, she was the reception class teacher in this school for the entire career. When she retired and was ill and was passing away, and I actually flew over, in New Zealand, they have a thing called a tangi, which is like a living wake where you go and pay your respects to the person. And literally no Facebook campaign, no nothing. Hundreds and hundreds of people came over from the mainland to the island to pay their respects to my auntie. And these were people like the chief executive of the Bank of New Zealand and the Minister for Transport and the Minister for Education and the captain of the Riders' Cup team or whatever it was, America's Cup team. And they all said, oh, Mrs. Salmon taught me this and I've never forgotten it. So if you describe a leader as someone who makes a difference to people's lives and has followers, I think my auntie was one of the greatest leaders I've ever known. And
What?
so
Wow.
when you start to talk about leaders, stop looking at the top of the Christmas tree and look at the people further down the Christmas tree who are the ones that everybody wants to work for, everybody wants to go and talk to about, get some coaching or mentoring or support from them. And so being at the top does not mean leadership.
Could
Don't,
not could not
don't,
agree more. What an honoring thing to say about your aunt as well. I mean, that and you're so right. You reminded me in that story. Have you read, Eric Schmidt's book, The $1 Trillion Coach, about Bill Campbell, by chance?
I haven't, but by the way, I've met Jim Collins many times and Good to Great and Built to
Oh,
Last and all sorts
yeah,
of things.
I would imagine. Well, you're all in the same class. I
But
mean,
I haven't read
yeah.
Eric.
Well, so Bill Campbell was essentially the, executive mentor, much like yourself, to Steve Jobs, John Chambers,
Mhm.
many of these Silicon Valley titans. Never took a penny of compensation. He had made enough. I think it was Applied Materials or somewhere where he made his fortune. He was a football coach. He coached at Columbia and ended up out in Silicon Valley taking a sales job, made a lot of money, remained out there, never took compensation from any of these, folks that he coached, but it was exactly like you were saying about your aunt. I mean, I guarantee you I could go ask 10 people that are working in Fortune 500. They probably wouldn't know who Bill Campbell was unless they happened to read the book because Eric Schmidt made him famous. But that's to me, those are the folks that if you can have that character quality about you, that you have the followers regardless of the title and all the accolades. Before I let you go, I want you to at least mention your academy, who it's for, and kind of what is the structure, of it, and anything you want this audience to know, because that's something that I actually wanna look into. So can you describe that real quick before we go?
Entelechy Academy is our website. And you can also go to Intelechy Academy on LinkedIn, where we've got white papers and all sorts of things published. But Intelechy Academy at the moment is a B2B enterprise business, where we're helping companies become a company of character, as I described earlier. And so if you're a CEO or a chief people officer or something, and you're interested in finding out more about how you could build your company to become a company of character and drive productivity and performance through the development of character, then go to www.intelechy.academy or Intelechy Academy on LinkedIn. And, there's lots of ways to contact me through LinkedIn or through the team through the website. But it works basically, as I was describing earlier, to get those two reports in the discover phase, which is like the MRI scan, the diagnosis of the character competence of your organization. And then you work out, okay, well, here's where we are. Here's where we want to get to in a year's time. And then we basically get everyone to work on the character qualities that will dial themselves up and move everybody towards the desired outcome. And so everybody gets an app, and there's more data and insights and some hand-holding consulting. But essentially, you and I could be teammates in the same department, and you've got to work on being more collaborative and organized and reliable. And I've got to work on being calm and kind and something else. And actually, you've got all of the three things I need to work on as strengths. And so it's like, okay, Jason, well, I've got to work on this one. What are your tips? What are your ideas? What's your advice for me? How can I do that in my job? You know me. Oh, well, how about you try this? And can I finish on? Have we got a minute to finish? So,
We've got as much time as you need, please.
okay. So about 6 months ago, we took on a new senior guy in our sales team. And every Monday morning at 10 o'clock, everyone in the entire company gets on a half an hour Zoom call, and we talk about which character qualities we're going to work on this month. And we choose one personal one and one professional one. And a lot of people say, oh, you're born with your character. You can't change it. and I'm just going to prove to you how rubbish that is. I was born a Capricorn. I can't change that, but I can certainly change, my character. So anyway, he chose to work on disciplined as his professional one and kind as his personal one. And so one of the girls in the team who was on his section said, why do you want to work on discipline? He said, well, I've got a big sales target to achieve, and I know that I get easily distracted by all the pings on my mobile phone, WhatsApp messages, Slack messages, but I need to be more disciplined and make my sales calls and what have you. And so one of the other guys in the thing said, well, what way I do that is I book myself a diary appointment and say, make sales calls from 9 o'clock till 10:15. And then I put in my diary coffee break from 10:15 till 10:30. And then 10:30 to 11:45, make calls. And then 11:45 to 12 o'clock, coffee break. And I put it in my diary. So I'm really super organized and disciplined with how I spend. Oh, that's very clever. Right, that's very easy to do. I can do that. And the lady colleague said to him, why don't you leave your mobile phone in the kitchen next to the coffee machine? And then you won't be distracted by the pings. And he said, well, that's two very simple things to do. Anyway, the next week, on the following Monday, he turns up to the team and says, well, that was too silly, simple piece of advice, but I reckon I made 4 hours more sales calls in a week. So I was probably at least, 10, 15% more productive. One silly, simple idea. But my favorite story is about the kind one. And so again, in his team, I wasn't in his team, but I've watched the recordings. One of the ladies said, well, who do you want to be kind to? And he said, well, my wife, we've been married 30 years. I've just had my first grandchild. I want to really show her how much I appreciate her. So I'm going to decide to be more kind to my wife. And one of the other ladies in the room said, what would she appreciate? And he said, oh, it's not big things. It's silly little things. I'll see if I can remember that. Oh, yes. First was take the trash out on Tuesday night and put it on the roadside for the people to collect it the next morning at 5 o'clock. The second was, without being asked or nagged, at 9 o'clock at night, take the dog round the block for a pee before bedtime. Number 3 was, if it's starting to rain, rush out and get the washing and put it in the basket, put it in the utility room. And the fourth one was, oh yes, he went first thing in the morning to the gym, and his gym was right next to her dry cleaners. And so if she left her tickets for the dry cleaning to be collected, pick them up, go to the gym, pick them up, so she didn't need to go during the day. Anyway, on the Friday evening, normally they would always on a Friday evening have supper at home, the two of them together. And she would bring him a gin and tonic at 6:30, tell him, clear your desk, switch your laptop off. Supper's going to be at 7 o'clock. But this particular Friday, she came in and bought 2 gin and tonics in, sat down on the chair in his office and said, right, I'm going to come straight to the point. Are you having an affair? And he's like, no, of course not. Why do you ask that? She said, well, this new company you've joined, what drugs are they giving you? And she said, you've collected my dry cleaning, you took the garbage out, you've taken the dog for a walk, and I'm not doing your naggy once. He said, well, I'm doing this thing to improve being kind. And she said, well, keep taking the Intelechy drugs. And so the reason I'm telling you that is, just in a week, think of the quick wins and the impact that he had from concentrating on being more kind to his wife and more disciplined at work. It's like, and then, of course, over the following weeks and months, he'd say, I started to be more kind to my daughter or to my neighbor or my boss or my colleague. And I started to be more disciplined in this area of my life, in this area of my life. And so there's 54 character qualities, any one of which you can work on for a week in a personal or professional capacity, and it will make a big difference in your life. So what's not to like about it?
I love it. Now, is there where I can get the 54 character traits and put them on in the show notes for folks? Is there a place I can grab those?
Um, if you, I can email, I think
Perfect.
you had an email from you earlier on today, and I'll just send you a one-page PDF.
That'd be perfect. I appreciate that. So, listeners, we will have those up as well as the website address. And I got to tell you, you've given me something new. You went to Aristotle, I went to Da Vinci, so I started a Vitruvian project because the Vitruvian being my muse. Whenever I read Walter Isaacson's book on Da Vinci, that's where I first learned the story of Vitruvius, the architect, and then bring it forward to Vitruvian Man and Da Vinci's attempt to draw the perfectly proportioned man. I thought that would serve as a nice muse for what I want to do is create perfect proportion. And that's where my motto, improve always in all ways, comes from. And so Entelechy, now I will have that in my arsenal as yet another thing to reinforce this idea that constant improvement is something that should never stop. And I can't think of much better to pursue than excellence in character. And so I think that this has been an incredibly you've been a great mentor for both me and this audience, David. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you being on, and the invitation is there. I would love to have you on anytime we can support you. And what's happened in the past, and I would certainly offer this to you. Once we do this initial interview, which is almost like an interview, get to know one another, then come back on anytime and let's just pick a topic and on leadership, on character. If you want to bring one of your either one of your business associates or someone that you've trained, I think those are some of the most meaningful conversations to just let people be a fly on the wall and kind of hash through some issues and some challenges that leaders have. And who better than David C.M. Carter to help work it out? I think that would be a lot of fun. So just know that invitation is always there.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
All right, brother. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Sit tight, and I'm going to hit pause. Well, that does it for this episode of The Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas Titan Media production. Fourth Wall did the music. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please consider going out to jasonwrightnow.com and signing up for the Vitruvian Letter. Also, please go out to iTunes. It takes like 30 seconds to just leave us a 5-star rating. It does wonders for the podcast. I would be so grateful. And with that, until we meet again, go crush it and endeavor to improve always in all ways. I'm out.